Hold on. I have you. Help us. Please.
"70-year-old man spent his whole life taking from the forest. Then one spring morning, he gave something back. Turned out the woods, remember things like that. Comment 7 if you want to hear what came after." Good. Here's his story. The Ausable River didn't care that Tom Mercer's back hurt. Didn't care that he was 67 years old with a spine full of ground glass from 40 years of logging. Didn't care that his wife had been dead 3 years come August. Or that his daughters lived 2 hours south in Syracuse and called maybe once a month. If he was lucky. The river just kept moving, same as it always had, carrying snowmelt down from the high peaks, like it had been doing since before there were people around to name it. Tom stood on his porch with coffee gone cold in his hand, listening to the water, louder than usual. Spring runoff was early this year. March had been warm, too warm, and now all that snow from a hard winter was coming down at once. He could hear it, even from here, quarter-mile through the pines. A low roar that made the air feel heavier somehow. Red lifted his head from the corner of the porch, ears pricked. The old retriever was 14, nearly deaf, hips shot to hell, but he still knew when something was off. Tom knew it too. The sound wasn't right, too urgent, too much like the river was trying to tell him something. "Yeah, I hear it," Tom muttered. He dumped the coffee over the rail into the dead leaves below. Don't mean I got to like it, but he went inside anyway. Pulled on the canvas work coat, with the torn elbow that Margaret used to tell him to throw away. The flannel underneath was the same one he'd worn since the mill shut down in 2010. Holes in the cuffs, collar frayed, warm enough. He laced up his boots, loggers, still good after 20 years. The one thing he'd spent money on back when he had money to spend, and grabbed the rope from the hook by the door. Red stood slowly, whining low in his throat. The dog knew the routine. Morning check of the trap line, even though Tom didn't trap anymore, hadn't in years. Just an excuse to walk the woods, to move his body before the arthritis locked it up for the day. "Come on then," Tom said. The trail north was mud and pine needles, slick under his boots. The forest smelled like wet earth and new growth, that early spring smell that used to mean the start of work season back when he was younger. Back when logging crews would mobilize after the thaw, when the woods were full of men and chainsaws and the sound of trees coming down. Not anymore. Most of the old growth was gone. What was left, nobody wanted to cut. Environmental groups, state regulations, the whole thing. Tom understood it, even agreed with some of it, but it didn't change the fact that the work was gone and he was too old to do anything else. Disability check came once a month. Social Security wouldn't start for another 3 years. He lived on less than he'd made in a week back in 1985. He kept walking. Red followed at a limp, panting already. The sound of the river grew louder as he approached. By the time he reached the bank, it was a roar. The Ausable was twice its normal size, maybe 3 times. Brown water churned over rocks that were usually exposed, dragging whole trees along like they were twigs. Ice chunks the size of truck hoods slammed into the bends, shattering into smaller pieces that disappeared downstream. Tom stopped at the ridge, overlooking the main channel. This was bad. Hadn't seen it this high since 2011, the year Irene came through and washed out half the roads in the Adirondacks. He scanned the banks, looking for damage to the trail, checking the old landmarks, the big hemlock, the sandbar where Margaret used to sit and read while he fished. He froze. There was something in the water, not driftwood, not a deer. 3 shapes, dark and massive, thrashing in the current about 50 yards downstream. The water was pulling them under, spitting them back up, dragging them toward a logjam that would crush anything that hit it. Tom's brain tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Bears, maybe. But bears didn't stand upright in water like that, didn't have arms that long, and they sure as hell didn't move with that kind of desperate coordination, like they were trying to save something. One of them, the biggest, was holding something small against its chest. The other was clawing at the water, trying to stay upright, failing. And between them, limp and unmoving, was a third shape. Smaller, not moving at all. Jesus Christ, Tom said. He didn't think. Thinking would have stopped him. His back was shot. His knees were worse. He was 67 years old and alone, and nobody would even know he was gone until the mailman noticed his box was full. Thinking about any of that would have kept him on the bank. Instead, he dropped the rope and started down the embankment. Red barked once, sharp and high, but Tom was already sliding through the mud, grabbing at saplings to slow himself, boots skidding on wet leaves. The river was louder down here, so loud it felt like being inside a machine. The big one in the water, the one holding the small shape, stumbled. Its eyes found Tom's. Not animal eyes, not human either, something else. Tom hit the gravel bar at the bottom and started pulling the rope into a loop. His hands were shaking. The cold or the adrenaline, or both. He let the loop fly. It caught around the big one's shoulder, barely, but enough. "Hold on," he shouted, not sure if it could understand, not sure it mattered. He pulled. The weight was impossible, like trying to drag a truck. The rope bit into his palms, and he felt something in his lower back pop, that familiar sensation of tissue giving way that he'd felt 100 times over the years. Didn't matter. He wrapped the rope around his forearms and leaned back, feet braced against a rock, every muscle in his body screaming. The big one moved forward, one step, then another. The current fought him, slamming chunks of ice into his legs, but he kept coming. Behind him, the second one clawed forward, using the rope as a guide. Tom's vision started to tunnel. His back was on fire, but he didn't let go. The big one hit the shallow water and fell forward onto the gravel. The small one, a child, Tom realized. It was a goddamn child, slid from its shoulder onto the rocks. No movement, no sound. The second one collapsed next to them, coughing up water, shaking violently. Tom dropped the rope and stumbled forward. His legs barely worked. The child lay on its side, matted hair plastered to its face, small chest not moving. Then it coughed. Water came up, then air, another breath, weak. But there, the big one, the father, had to be the father, pushed itself up onto its hands and knees. Steam rose from its fur, not fur exactly, closer to hair, but thicker. It turned its head and looked at Tom. Tom stood there, rope burns bleeding on his palms, back screaming, heart hammering in his chest like it was trying to break his ribs. The mother was gathering the child now, pulling it close, checking it over with hands that looked too human and not human enough. The father kept staring. Its eyes were deep set, brown, intelligent. It was breathing hard, chest heaving like a bellows. Then it did something Tom would remember for the rest of his life. It nodded, just once, slow, deliberate. Tom's mouth opened, but nothing came out. What the hell do you say to something that shouldn't exist, that you just pulled out of a river? That's looking at you like it knows exactly who you are and what you just did. He settled for nodding back. Seemed like the thing to do. The mother stood, lifting the child in her arms. The father rose next to her. Both of them were massive. Had to be 7 feet tall, maybe more. They turned toward the tree line. The child looked back at Tom, eyes wide, curious. Then they stepped into the pines and were gone, just like that. No sound, no cracking branches, nothing, like they'd never been there at all. Tom stood alone on the gravel bar. His breath came in ragged gasps. Blood dripped from his hands onto the rocks. Red was barking from somewhere up the ridge, high-pitched and frantic. The river kept moving behind him, indifferent to everything that had just happened. He looked down at his hands. The rope burns were deep, would take weeks to heal. His back felt like someone had taken a crowbar to his spine, and his chest felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just different. Like something had shifted that couldn't be put back. He stood there for a long time. Could have been 30 seconds, could have been 10 minutes. Time felt wrong, stretched out and compressed at the same time. Finally, he turned to climb back up the embankment. That's when he realized they were still there. Not in the water, in the trees. The father stood just inside the tree line, maybe 20 yards away, still dripping, still breathing hard. The mother was behind him, one hand on the child's shoulder. They were all watching him. Tom's heart kicked against his ribs. Every instinct told him to run. He didn't run. The father took a step forward, not threatening, just a step. The morning sun broke through the clouds behind them, catching the steam rising from their bodies, turning it gold. They looked like something carved out of the forest itself, old, ancient. Like they'd been here long before the loggers came, before the roads, before any of it. The breeze picked up, carrying the smell of wet fir and pine. Birds had gone silent. Even the river seemed quieter somehow. The father's eyes found Tom's again. No desperation this time, no panic, just recognition. An acknowledgement of what had happened, what Tom had done. Then it turned and walked back into the trees. The mother followed. The child glanced back one more time, then disappeared too. Tom exhaled. Didn't realize he'd been holding his breath. Red came limping down the slope, whining, tail between his legs. Tom put a hand on the dog's head, grounded himself. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I don't know either." They walked back to the cabin slow. Tom's back sent lightning bolts down his legs with every step. His hands were still bleeding, but he kept moving, one foot in front of the other. Same as always. The birds started singing again. A pair of chickadees darted across the trail like nothing had happened. The forest returned to itself. But Tom wasn't the same. Something in him had changed, not fixed, not healed, just changed. At the cabin, he cleaned his hands at the sink, wrapped them in gauze from the kit under the bathroom counter. The same kit Margaret had stocked before she died, and he'd never thought to refill. There were 3 Band-Aids left and half a roll of tape. He made fresh coffee, sat by the wood stove with Red at his feet, stared into the fire. All he could see were those eyes, that nod, that impossible moment of understanding between two things that had no business understanding each other. He thought about Margaret for the first time in weeks without it hurting. Really thought about her. Not the absence, not the silence, the way she used to hum while making breakfast. The way she'd always believed there was more to the world than what people could see or explain. "You'd have believed me," he said to the empty room. His voice was rough from the cold and the river water. Outside, the wind moved through the pines. Inside, something old and frozen in Tom's chest shifted slightly, not melting, just shifting, like something reaching up through ice. Not to drag him down, just to remind him it was there. He sat by the fire until it burned down to coals. Then he added another log and sat some more. Red snored softly. The sun climbed higher, throwing long shadows across the floorboards. Tom didn't sleep that night. Not really, just dozed in the chair, waking every hour to stare at the dying fire. His hands throbbed. His back was a dull roar of pain, but he didn't take anything for it. Wanted to feel it, wanted to know it was real. Because if the pain was real, then maybe the rest of it was too. By morning, his hands had swollen to twice their normal size. The gauze was soaked through with fluid that wasn't quite blood, wasn't quite clear. Tom unwrapped them at the sink, ran cold water over the burns, and rewrapped them with the last of the tape. His reflection in the mirror over the basin looked older than 67. Grey stubble, eyes red-rimmed, shoulders hunched forward like he was still bracing against that rope. He made coffee, burned the first pot because his hands couldn't grip the scoop right, made it again, drank it black because the cream had gone bad 2 days ago and he'd forgotten to drive into town. Red watched him from the corner, head on his paws, unconvinced that anything about yesterday had been a good idea. "Don't start," Tom said. The dog huffed and closed his eyes. Tom pulled on his coat slower this time, every movement sending fresh pain through his lower back, and stepped onto the porch. The morning was clear, cold. The kind of April cold that reminds you winter's not done with you yet, just taking a break. The river was still loud, but not like yesterday. The roar had dropped to a steady rush. He should check the trail, make sure the embankment hadn't washed out. Should check the fence line on the south property, see if any trees had come down in the runoff. Should do a lot of things. Instead, he stood there with his coffee and stared at the tree line. Nothing moved. No shapes in the shadows. No eyes watching. Just pines and hardwoods and the slow drip of snowmelt from the branches. "You're losing it," he muttered, but he kept staring anyway. He spent the day doing nothing useful. Tried to split wood, but his hands couldn't grip the axe. Tried to fix the gutter that had been hanging loose since last fall, but couldn't climb the ladder. Ended up sitting on the porch, smoking cigarettes he'd quit 5 years ago, but kept a pack of in the truck for emergencies. This felt like an emergency. Red limped out mid-afternoon and sat next to him. They watched the woods together. Nothing happened. Evening came. The sun dropped behind the ridge, throwing long shadows across the clearing. Tom made dinner canned soup, toast, same as always, and ate half of it before his stomach turned. He sat by the window with the lights off, watched the darkness gather between the trees. Listened. Around midnight, he heard it. Not loud, not close, but there. A sound that didn't belong. Not an animal call, not the wind. Something else. Low and rhythmic, like someone humming just below the range of hearing. It made the hair on his arms stand up. Red growled. Not at the window. At the back door. Tom stood slowly. His back protested. He ignored it, crossed the room in 4 steps, and put his hand on the doorknob. Stopped. "You open this door, you're in it," he said to himself. "Whatever this is, you're in it." He opened the door. The back porch was empty. But there, at the edge of the clearing where the grass met the trees, something had been placed on the old tree stump he used to split, kindling on. Tom squinted into the darkness. Couldn't make it out. He grabbed the flashlight from the hook by the door and stepped off the porch. Red followed close, whining low. The grass was wet with dew. It soaked through Tom's socks. He'd forgotten shoes, but he kept walking. 30 feet to the stump. 20. 10. He aimed the flashlight. 3 fish. Fresh caught brook trout, each one maybe 10 inches long, laid out in a neat row, still wet, still cold, caught within the last few hours. Had to be. Tom's throat went tight. He bent down, ignoring the screaming in his back, and touched one. The scales were slick under his fingers. Real. Definitely real. He straightened and turned in a slow circle, scanning the tree line with the flashlight beam. Nothing. No movement. No eyes reflecting back. Just trees and shadows and the sound of the river in the distance. "All right," he said to the darkness. Message received. He picked up the fish panes shot through his burned palms, but he didn't drop them and carried them back to the cabin. Cleaned them at the sink with shaking hands, wrapped them in foil, and put them in the refrigerator next to the bad cream and the half-empty jar of pickles. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing. They were real. The whole thing was real. And now they knew where he lived. The question was, what did they want? He didn't sleep again that night, just dozed in the chair with Red at his feet, and the 30-06 he'd used for deer hunting across his lap, not because he was scared, because he wanted to be ready. For what? He didn't know. Morning came. He fried the fish for breakfast. Best thing he'd eaten in months. The next 3 days passed in a strange rhythm. Tom went about his routine: coffee, walk the property, sit on the porch, make dinner, sleep in the chair, but everything felt different. Like the world had tilted slightly, and he was still learning how to walk on the new angle. Nothing appeared on the stump. No sounds in the night. No shapes in the trees. Just silence, and the steady drum of the river returning to normal levels. His hands started to heal. The swelling went down. The burns scabbed over. His back settled into its usual dull roar instead of the sharp agony it had been. On the 4th morning, he found tracks. Not on his property. On the trail north. near where he'd pulled them from the river. Big prints, bigger than any boot, pressed deep into the mud that was starting to dry in the spring Sunday. 5 toes, wide set, heavy, fresh, from some time during the night. Tom knelt next to them, felt the edge of the print with his fingers. The mud was still slightly damp, maybe 6 hours old, maybe less. He followed them, north along the ridge, then east toward the old logging road nobody used anymore. The prints were spaced far apart, long stride, moving fast but not running, purposeful. They led to a section of forest Tom hadn't been to in years. Too thick, too much undergrowth. Not worth the effort when his knees were good, definitely not worth it now. But the tracks went straight in, so he followed. Brambles tore at his jeans. Low branches caught his hat. He pushed through, breathing hard, until he emerged into a small clearing he'd forgotten existed, and stopped. The clearing was maybe 30 feet across, surrounded by old-growth hemlock that had somehow escaped the cutting. In the center was a natural spring, water bubbling up through the rocks and forming a small pool before trickling away into the underbrush. And around the pool, arranged carefully, were stones. Flat river stones, each one about the size of a dinner plate, placed in a circle. Inside the circle were smaller stones, stacked on top of each other in careful piles. Not random, deliberate, intentional. Tom's breath caught. This wasn't natural. This was built, made, by something with hands and intention, and a purpose he couldn't begin to understand. He stepped closer. The water in the pool was crystal clear. He could see the bottom, maybe 3 feet down, covered in white sand. And there, resting on the sand, was something that made his chest tighten. A piece of rope. His rope. The one he'd used to pull them from the river. It had been cut, clean cut, not frayed into a section about 2 feet long, coiled neatly, and placed in the center of the pool like an offering. Tom sat down hard on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing. His legs just gave out. They'd kept it, brought it here, left it in this place that felt sacred somehow, even though Tom didn't believe in sacred. Not anymore. Not since Margaret died, and God didn't seem to give a damn. But this felt like something. Like a marker, like a place that mattered. He sat there for an hour, maybe more, watching the water, listening to the forest, trying to understand what any of this meant. When he finally stood to leave, he did something he didn't plan. He picked up a small stone from the edge of the pool, smooth and round and dark grey, held it for a moment, then placed it carefully on top of one of the stacked piles. His contribution, his answer. He walked back to the cabin slow. Red was waiting on the porch, tail wagging for the first time in days. That night, Tom slept in his bed instead of the chair. Slept deep, slept without dreams. And when he woke the next morning to the sound of something heavy moving on his porch, he didn't reach for the rifle. He got up, pulled on his jeans and flannel, and walked to the front door, opened it. The father stood at the bottom of the porch steps. In the daylight, he was even bigger than Tom remembered. Massive shoulders, arms thick as Tom's thighs, covered in hair that was more brown than black, shot through with grey around the face. They looked at each other. Tom's heart was hammering, but his hands were steady. He stepped out onto the porch, leaving the door open behind him. Red stayed inside, watching through the screen. The creature took one step back. Not retreating, just giving space. "Morning," Tom said. Felt stupid saying it, but what else do you say? The creature tilted its head slightly, studying him. Then it turned and walked toward the tree line. Stopped, looked back. Tom understood. An invitation, or a request, or something. "Give me a minute," he said. He went inside, pulled on his boots, grabbed his coat. Didn't bring the rifle. If this thing wanted him dead, the rifle wouldn't matter anyway. He followed it into the woods. They walked for 20 minutes. The creature moved slow, checking back periodically to make sure Tom was still following. His back was screaming by the 10-minute mark, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. This was important. He could feel it. They arrived at another clearing, smaller than the one with the spring, and there, sitting on a fallen log, was the mother. The child was next to her, playing with something in the dirt. Sticks, maybe. Drawing patterns. The child looked up when Tom appeared. Its eyes went wide, but it didn't run, just watched. The mother watched too. Wary, protective. Her hand moved slightly closer to the child. The father made a sound, not words, just a low rumble in his chest. The mother's posture relaxed slightly. Not much, but enough. Tom stayed at the edge of the clearing. Didn't approach. Just stood there, hands in his pockets, trying to look as non-threatening as a 67-year-old man with a bad back could look. The child stood, walked toward him, slow, careful, stopped about 10 feet away. It was holding something, extended its arm, offering. Tom stepped forward. His knees protested. He ignored them, closed the distance. The child dropped something into his burned palm and stepped back quickly. Tom looked down. A small carved figure, made from wood, rough but recognizable. A man, arms outstretched, holding a rope. Him. It was him. Tom's throat closed up. He looked at the child. The child looked back. Then it smiled. Jesus Christ. It smiled and ran back to its mother. The mother gathered it close. The father moved to stand beside them. A family, whole, alive. Because Tom had been there. Because he'd acted instead of walked away. "You're welcome," Tom said quietly. The father nodded again. That same slow, deliberate nod from the river. Then they stood and walked into the trees. Together. And were gone. Tom stood alone in the clearing, holding the carved figure in his scarred hand, and felt something break open in his chest that had been sealed shut since Margaret's funeral. He walked back to the cabin, put the figure on the windowsill where the morning light would hit it, made coffee, sat on the porch with Red, and for the first time in 3 years, he thought about tomorrow. Actually thought about it. What he might do, where he might go, who he might call. Not because he was healed. He wasn't. The grief was still there. The pain was still there. Margaret was still dead, and his back was still shot, and his daughter still didn't call. But something had shifted. Something had opened. A door he thought was locked forever. He finished his coffee and went inside to find his phone. Scrolled through the contacts he never called. Found Jennifer, his oldest. Hadn't talked to her in hell. Had to be 4 months. His finger hovered over the call button. Then from somewhere in the woods, he heard it. 3 knocks. Wood on wood. Rhythmic. Deliberate. Not a threat. A greeting. Tom smiled. First real smile in longer than he could remember. He pressed call. The phone rang 4 times. Tom was about to hang up when Jennifer answered. "Dad?" Her voice was wary. Probably checking her screen to make sure she'd read it right. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah," Tom said. "Everything's fine." Silence on the other end. The kind of silence that meant she didn't believe him. Fair enough. He only called when something was wrong. Last time was January when the furnace died, and he needed her husband's friend who did HVAC work. Tom started, then stopped. Didn't know how to finish. Just wanted to hear your voice sounded pathetic. Just wanted to know you're alive sounded worse. Dad, seriously. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Just wanted to check in, see how you're doing. How's Emma, his granddaughter? 10 years old. He'd seen her maybe 3 times in the last 2 years. Another pause. She's good. Made honor roll again. Growing like a weed. That's good. That's real good. More silence. This was going badly. Tom didn't know how to talk to his own daughter anymore. Hadn't known since Margaret died, if he was being honest. Margaret had been the bridge between them, the translator. Without her, Tom and Jennifer just sort of existed in separate spaces, connected by blood and obligation, and not much else. "Listen, I know I haven't been." Tom paused. Red was looking at him from the doorway. "I haven't been good at this. At calling, at being around. Since your mother." "Dad, let me finish." His voice came out rougher than he meant. "I know I shut down. No, I pushed you and Sarah away. Wasn't fair to either of you. You lost her too. He heard Jennifer take a breath. When she spoke again, her voice was different, softer. Yeah, we did. I'm trying to do better. That's all. Just wanted you to know that. Okay, Jennifer said quietly. Okay. They talked for 10 more minutes. Surface stuff. Emma's soccer team. Sarah's new job in Syracuse. The weather. Nothing deep. But it was something. More than they'd had in months. When Tom hung up, his hands were shaking. But it was a different kind of shaking than the rope burns. This felt like something thawing. He looked at the carved figure on the windowsill. The man with outstretched arms. Yeah, he said to it. I'm working on it. The next 2 weeks settled into something almost normal. Tom checked the clearing with the spring every few days. Sometimes there were new stones added to the piles. Sometimes his stone had been moved. Once he found a bundle of fresh herbs, wild ramps, he thought, though he wasn't sure left on the flat rock near the pool. He left things too, apples from the cold storage in his basement, a wool blanket he didn't need, a fishing lure that had been Margaret's favorite, bright green with silver flecks. That one disappeared within a day. The 3 knocks came most nights around dusk, sometimes from the north, sometimes the east, never close to the cabin, but close enough to hear. Tom started knocking back. 3 raps on the porch post with his knuckles, a conversation without words. Red stopped being nervous. Started wagging his tail when the knocks came. Old Dog knew a friend when he heard one, even if that friend was 7 feet tall and covered in hair. Tom called Jennifer twice more, short calls, easier each time. She mentioned coming up to visit in June, bringing Emma. Tom said that would be good. Meant it. His back still hurt. His hands still bore scars from the rope. He was still 67 and still running out of time. But the weight of it felt different, less like drowning, more like just living. Then the trucks showed up. Tom heard them before he saw them. Diesel engines, multiple vehicles, coming up the old logging road that ran along the eastern border of his property. He was on the porch with his morning coffee when the sound started. Red's ears went up. Tom set down his mug and walked around the side of the cabin toward the road. Took him 5 minutes. His hip was acting up. But he got there in time to see 3 trucks park in the clearing where the old mill site used to be. 2 were pickups, FEF 250 seconds. Looked new, probably cost more than Tom had made in 5 years of logging. The third was a utility truck with a state forestry seal on the door. 4 men got out, 3 in hunting gear, expensive stuff, Gore-Tex and tactical vests. The 4th wore a forestry service uniform. They started unloading equipment, trail cameras, GPS units, what looked like motion sensors. Tom's stomach dropped. He walked out of the trees. All 4 men turned. The one in the uniform smiled, too friendly. The kind of friendly that meant he wanted something. "Morning," the man said. "You must be Mr. Mercer. I'm Dan Kowalski, Regional Wildlife Management." He extended his hand. Tom didn't shake it. "What are you doing on my property?" "Actually, we're on state land. Your property line is about 50 yards that way." Kowalski pointed west, still smiling. "We're conducting a wildlife survey. Standard procedure. There have been some interesting reports from this area." "Reports of what?" "Black bears, mostly. Few sightings of what people thought were moose, but that's unlikely this far south. Probably just big deer." Kowalski pulled out a tablet. "We're setting up monitoring stations. Should only take a few days. Won't bother you at all." Tom looked at the other 3 men. They were watching him with the kind of eyes Tom recognized. Hunters. Not the kind who needed meat, the kind who needed trophies. "You need to leave," Tom said. Kowalski's smile dimmed. "Sir, like I said, this is state land. We have every right. I don't care what rights you think you have. There's nothing out here worth monitoring. Pack up your gear and go." One of the hunters, big guy, maybe 40, beard like a lumberjack, stepped forward. "Old man, you don't own these woods. We're here doing our job. You got a problem, call the governor." Tom met his eyes, held them, used the stare he'd perfected in 40 years of logging, dealing with crew bosses and union reps and corporate assholes who thought they could push him around. "I'm asking polite," Tom said quietly. "Once." The hunter laughed. "Or what? You gonna stop us?" Tom didn't answer. Yost kept staring. Kowalski put a hand on the hunter's shoulder. "Look, Mr. Mercer, we're not trying to cause trouble, just doing our jobs. We'll stay off your property, keep our distance. You won't even know we're here." "I'll know," Tom said. "And you need to leave." He turned and walked back toward his cabin. Behind him, he heard the hunter say something that ended with "crazy old bastard." Heard Kowalski tell him to shut up and get back to work. Tom's hands were shaking by the time he got back to the porch. Not from fear, from rage. Pure, clean rage that he hadn't felt in years. They were here for the family. Had to be. Someone had seen something, reported it. And now these men with their cameras and guns were going to turn the woods into a hunting ground. He went inside, grabbed his coat, started walking north toward the clearing with the spring, moved faster than his back wanted, but he didn't care. Had to warn them, had to. He stopped. The father was already there, standing in the middle of the trail, perfectly still, watching Tom approach. "They're here," Tom said, breathing hard. "Men, with cameras. They're looking for you." The creature didn't move, just looked at him with those deep brown eyes. "You need to go deeper. Get away from here. They find you, Tom stopped. Didn't know how to finish. What would they do? Kill them? Capture them? Put them in a zoo? All of it felt wrong. The creature made a sound. Low, almost like a sigh. Then it turned and walked into the trees. Tom followed. They didn't go to the clearing with the spring. They went deeper, south and east, into a part of the forest Tom had never been. The undergrowth got thicker, the trees older, the light dimmer. After 20 minutes, they emerged into a valley Tom hadn't known existed. Steep walls of rock on 3 sides, covered in moss and ferns, a small stream running through the center. And there, tucked into an alcove in the rock face, was their home. Not a cave, more like an overhang, deep enough to provide shelter, shallow enough to stay dry. Inside were beds made of pine boughs and moss, tools made from stone and bone, a fire pit lined with river rocks, cold now but showing signs of use. The mother was there, the child too. They looked at Tom with wide eyes. The child moved behind its mother. The father made another sound. The mother responded, back and forth. Not language Tom could understand, but communication, clear as day. The mother picked up a large pack, woven from some kind of fiber Tom couldn't identify, and started filling it. The child helped, moving carefully, methodically, packing to leave. "No," Tom said. "Wait." They stopped, looked at him. "You shouldn't have to leave. This is your home. You were here first." The father shook his head, a very human gesture, almost sad. Tom's chest tightened. "How long have you been here?" The creature didn't answer. Couldn't answer. But Tom understood anyway. Longer than him. Longer than the logging. Longer than the roads and the towns, and probably the state itself. And now they were leaving because men with cameras and guns couldn't leave well enough alone. "There has to be another way," Tom said. The father placed a hand on Tom's shoulder. Huge hand. Could crush his collarbone without trying. But gentle. The touch was gentle. Then it went back to packing. Tom stood there feeling useless. 67 years old, bad back, scarred hands. Couldn't stop 4 men with equipment and authority. Couldn't protect the beings who'd trusted him enough to show him their home. He walked back to his cabin alone. The rage had faded. Left behind was something colder, something harder. He sat on his porch and thought. Red laid at his feet and watched him think. By sunset, Tom had a plan. Not a good plan, but a plan. He walked to his truck, Old F, 150, 20 years old. Rusted to hell, but still running and drove into town. First time he'd driven anywhere in 2 weeks. Pulled into the parking lot of the volunteer fire department, where half the guys he used to log with drank coffee and played cards on Friday nights. Big Mike Russo was there. So was Pete Hendricks and Danny Chen. All of them retired or close to it. All of them with nothing better to do than sit around and complain about how things used to be better. Tom walked in. They all looked up. "Tom," Mike said, surprised. "Hell, man, haven't seen you in months." "Need a favor," Tom said. "Need it tonight." They listened. Tom told them about the Forestry Service, about the men with cameras, left out the part about what they were actually looking for. Just said they were tearing up the woods for no good reason, making noise, scaring off game, being general assholes. That was enough. These men had spent their lives in those woods, didn't like outsiders coming in, didn't like authority, didn't like being told what they could and couldn't do on land. They considered theirs even if the deed said different. "What do you want us to do?" Pete asked. Tom smiled. First time he'd smiled all day. "Going to need your trucks, and about 6 hours of your time." By midnight, they had the old logging road blocked. Mike's truck across the entrance, Pete's truck across the exit. Danny had accidentally knocked down a few standing dead trees across the middle section. Not enough to be vandalism, just enough to make the road impassable. The trail cameras disappeared. The motion sensors. Batteries died. Weird how that happened. The 4 men from the Forestry Service showed up the next morning to find their trucks blocked in and their equipment mysteriously malfunctioning. Kowalski was pissed, called the sheriff. Sheriff was Danny's cousin. Took 3 hours to show up. Took one look at the situation and said it looked like natural deadfall to him. These old roads weren't maintained. Trees fell. That was nature. The hunters threatened. Made noise about trespassing and destruction of property. Mike 6-4, 250. Arms like tree trunks suggested they were welcome to try moving the logs themselves. By hand, since it was nature and all. They left by noon. Trucks crawling over the rough detour Mike had discovered that added an hour to the drive out. Kowalski promised he'd be back with proper authorization. Tom thanked the guys. Bought them around at the Legion Hall that night. First time he'd been there since Margaret's wake, but he knew it was temporary. The Forestry Service would come back. Maybe not this week, maybe not this month, but they'd come back, and next time they'd bring more people, more authority. He walked out to the valley the next morning. The family was still there, still packing. Moving slower now, but moving. "Bought you some time," Tom said. "Not much, but some." The father looked at him, that same long, measuring look. Tom sat down on a fallen log. His back was killing him. Don't know what else to do. Can't stop them forever. Can't fight the state. Can't. He trailed off. Felt old. Felt useless. The child approached. Slow, cautious. Sat down next to him on the log. Not touching. Just close. They sat together in silence. The mother made a sound. The father responded. Then he walked over to Tom and extended his hand, palm up, offering something. Tom took it. A small bundle wrapped in leather. He unwrapped it. Inside was a stone, smooth, black, with a white vein running through it, like a river. And carved into the surface, crude but clear, were 3 symbols. A tree, a man, a circle around both. "Don't understand," Tom said. The father placed his hand over his heart, then pointed at Tom, then pointed at the trees around them. Tom looked at the stone, at the symbols, at the family watching him, and suddenly he understood. They weren't asking him to save them. They were asking him to remember, to bear witness, to hold this moment, this connection when they were gone, because they would be gone. Eventually, whether it was the Forestry Service or hunters or time itself, they were the last. Tom could see it in their eyes. The last of something that had been here long before men with maps and deeds and cameras, and they were trusting him to remember that they'd been real, that they'd mattered, that they'd been here. Tom's eyes stung. He wrapped his fingers around the stone, nodded. "I'll remember," he said. voice rough. "I promise." The father nodded back. Then the family finished packing, and one by one, they walked into the deep woods, heading north, toward the high peaks where people didn't go, where maybe, just maybe, they'd have a little more time. The child looked back once, raised a small hand. Tom raised his, watched them disappear into the trees. Then he sat alone in the valley and let himself cry for the first time since Margaret's funeral. Tom walked back to his cabin with the stone in his pocket. The weight of it felt significant, not heavy, just present, a reminder. Red was waiting on the porch. The dog looked past him toward the woods, ears forward, waiting for the 3 knocks that wouldn't come. "They're gone," Tom said. Red whined, laid down with his head on his paws. Tom sat next to him, put his hand on the dog's neck. They stayed like that until the sun dropped behind the ridge. The Forestry Service came back 3 days later. Different crew. Kowalski and some supervisor from Albany. They set up their cameras on state land, just like they said they would, checked them every week for a month. Found nothing. Black bears, deer, a fisher cat, normal Adirondack wildlife. By June they stopped coming. Cameras stayed up, but nobody checked them. By August, the batteries were dead, and nobody replaced them. Nature reclaimed the equipment, the way it reclaims everything eventually. Vines grew over the sensors. Rain rusted the metal. Mice nested in the battery compartments. Tom checked the valley once a week. The overhang was empty. Rain had washed away the fire pit. Wind had scattered the pine boughs. In 6 months, there was no sign anyone had ever lived there. The forest had swallowed the evidence whole. But Tom remembered. That was his job now, to remember. He kept the carved figure on the windowsill. The stone with the symbols went into his pocket every morning. He'd reach in and touch it throughout the day, grounding himself, reminding himself it had been real. Jennifer came to visit in June like she'd promised. Brought Emma and her husband Dave. They stayed 3 days. Emma wanted to explore the woods. Tom took her to the clearing with the spring, showed her the stacked stones. "Who made these?" Emma asked. "Someone who used to live here," Tom said. "Long time ago." "Are they still here?" "No, they had to leave." "That's sad." "Yeah," Tom said. "It is." But Emma found a small flat stone and added it to one of the piles. Her contribution. Tom didn't stop her. That night, while Dave and Jennifer slept, Tom sat on the porch and listened to the woods. No knocks came, but he knocked anyway, 3 times on the post, just in case. July brought heat. Tom's garden grew first time he'd planted one since Margaret died. Tomatoes, peppers, green beans. More than he could eat. He gave half to Jennifer when she visited again in August. Gave some to Mike Russo and Pete Hendricks. Started cooking real meals again instead of canned soup. His kitchen smelled like food instead of dust. Red's hips got worse. By September, the dog couldn't manage the porch steps anymore. Tom carried him up and down, 60 pounds of retriever, and Tom's back screamed every time. But he did it anyway. Sarah called in October. His younger daughter. First time she'd called in over a year. Said Jennifer told her he was doing better. Asked if she could come for Thanksgiving. Tom said yes. Red died 3 days before Thanksgiving. Old age. No drama. Just went to sleep by the wood stove and didn't wake up. Tom buried him out back, near where Margaret's garden used to be. Dug the hole himself even though his back threatened to give out. Took him 4 hours. Wrapped Red in the wool blanket he'd once left at the spring clearing, the one that had come back to his porch 2 days later with a small bundle of dried flowers tucked into the folds. He cried again, getting easier each time, or maybe just more necessary. Jennifer and Sarah both came for Thanksgiving, Emma too, and Dave, and Sarah's new boyfriend whose name Tom forgot immediately, but who seemed decent enough. They filled the cabin with noise and life, and the smell of turkey roasting. Tom sat at the head of the table. Margaret's chair stayed empty. He wasn't ready for that yet, and looked at his family, his girls, grown women now with their own lives. But here, with him, I'm grateful you're all here, he said. Not usually one for speeches, but it needed saying. Grateful you didn't give up on me when I gave up on myself. Jennifer's eyes got wet. Sarah reached over and squeezed his scarred hand. They ate, talked, laughed. Emma told stories about school. Sarah complained about her boss. Dave fixed the gutter Tom still hadn't gotten around to. After dinner, Tom walked out to the porch. The November air was cold. Snow would come soon. Jennifer followed him. You seem different, Dad, she said. Better. I am better. What changed? Tom touched the stone in his pocket. Got reminded that life's shorter than we think, and longer than we deserve. Figured I should do something with what's left. That's pretty philosophical for you. Yeah, well, I'm old, allowed to get philosophical. Jennifer smiled, leaned her head on his shoulder the way she used to when she was small. Mom would be happy you're doing better. I know, Tom said, trying to make her proud. Little late, but trying. They stood together in the cold until Dave called that he'd started a fire in the wood stove, and did anyone want coffee? Winter came hard that year. Snow started in November and didn't stop until March. Tom kept the driveway clear, kept the wood stove going, kept himself busy. Jennifer called every week. Sarah called every other week. Emma sent him drawings from school that he taped to the refrigerator. He still walked the woods when the snow wasn't too deep, still checked the clearing with the spring. The stacked stones were covered in snow, but he knew where they were, added a stone whenever he visited. His own ritual. No tracks appeared in the snow, no sounds in the night, but sometimes, late in the evening when the wind was right, he thought he heard something. Distant, like a low call from the high peaks. Could have been his imagination. Could have been the wind. Could have been a lot of things. He chose to believe it was them, letting him know they were still there, still alive, still holding on. Christmas came. The whole family gathered at Jennifer's place in Syracuse. First time Tom had left the Adirondacks in 2 years. First time he'd driven more than 20 miles since Margaret's funeral. Sarah picked him up because Jennifer didn't trust his truck on the highway. He brought presents, actual wrapped presents, not just cash in a card. A carved wooden box for Jennifer he'd taken up wood carving, something to do with his hands in the evenings. A painted rock for Emma with a tree and a heart. A good knife for Dave. A scarf for Sarah's boyfriend. They seemed surprised, pleased, like they'd been expecting the old Tom who barely acknowledged holidays. This Tom was different. Trying. He stayed 2 days, slept in Jennifer's guest room, ate her cooking, played board games with Emma, had an actual conversation with Sarah about her life, her job, her plans. Listened more than he talked. On the drive back, Sarah said, I missed you, Dad. The real you. Not the ghost who's been living in your house the last few years. I missed me too, Tom said. She laughed. That's a weird thing to say. It's true though. January was quiet. The cabin felt emptier without Red. Tom thought about getting another dog, decided against it. Not fair to the dog. He was 68 now. His back was getting worse. His knees were shot. The doctor had been generous when he said 2 good years left. Tom knew the truth. 1 year, maybe, probably less. But he wasn't scared of it anymore. Wasn't rushing toward it either, just accepting it. Death was coming same way winter comes. Can't stop it. Can only prepare and wait. He spent January organizing. Threw out half the junk in his basement. Donated Margaret's clothes to Goodwill, should have done that years ago. Found old photo albums and went through them. Labeled the pictures so Jennifer and Sarah would know who everyone was when he was gone. Found a picture of Margaret at the river. Summer of 1988, sitting on the sandbar, reading a book, sun in her hair. She was 42, beautiful, smiling at whoever was taking the picture. Probably him. He put that one in a frame. Put it on the mantel next to the carved figure. His past and his present, both real, both important. February brought a cold snap, -20 for a week straight. Tom kept the fire going day and night. The cabin creaked in the cold like it was getting old too. Probably was. Built in 1952, 70 years of Adirondack winters would age anything. One night, during the worst of the cold, Tom heard them, 3 knocks, clear as day. Despite the wind, despite the cold, he got up from his chair, wrapped himself in his coat, and walked to the back door. Opened it. The cold hit like a fist. His breath crystallized immediately. The thermometer on the porch read -18. He stepped outside anyway. Looked toward the tree line. Nothing visible. Too dark. Too cold. But he knew they were there. "You all right out there?" he called into the darkness. His voice cracked in the cold. No answer. Just wind. Tom knocked 3 times on the post. His signal. "I hear you. I remember. You're not alone." From the woods, 3 knocks answered back. Wood on wood. Rhythmic. Clear. They were alive. They'd survived another winter. Against everything, the cold, the hunters, the encroaching world, they were still there. Tom smiled, went back inside before his fingers froze, sat by the fire and felt something close to peace. March brought the thaw. The river swelled again, but not like last year. Tom walked the banks carefully, checking, always checking. Found tracks once, big ones, heading north, fresh. He followed them for an hour, but his back gave out, had to turn around. But he'd seen enough. They were still here, still in these woods. That was enough. April came with rain and mud season. Tom's 69th birthday passed, without much fanfare. Jennifer called. Sarah sent a card. Emma made him a drawing of a tree with a face that Tom hung on the refrigerator next to her other drawings. He felt old, felt tired. The doctor visits were getting more frequent. His heart was struggling. Blood pressure medication wasn't working like it should. Doctor said maybe it was time to think about assisted living, somewhere with medical staff nearby. Tom said he'd think about it. Knew he wouldn't do it. He'd die in this cabin, or not at all. May brought warmth. The forest exploded with green. Tom planted his garden again, bigger this time. Tomatoes, squash, beans, peppers, cucumbers. Way more than he could eat or give away. But he planted it anyway. Felt good to make things grow. One evening, while he was watering, he heard footsteps behind him. Turned expecting to see a neighbor, or maybe a lost hiker. The child stood at the edge of the clearing, bigger now, taller, maybe 4 feet instead of 3, still young but growing. Tom's breath caught. He set down the watering can slowly. "Hey there," he said quietly. The child didn't approach, just watched. In its hand was something small. Tom took a step forward, then another, moving slow. The child didn't run, held its ground. They met in the middle of the clearing. The child extended its hand, dropped something into Tom's palm. Acorn. Perfect and whole. The cap still attached. Tom looked at it. Looked at the child. For me, the child nodded. Very human gesture. Learned or instinctual, Tom didn't know. "Thank you," Tom said. The child smiled, then turned and ran back toward the trees. Disappeared into the undergrowth without a sound. Tom stood holding the acorn until the sun went down. Then he went inside and placed it on the windowsill next to the carved figure. A gift, a reminder, a promise kept on both sides. June brought Jennifer and Emma again. They stayed a week this time. Emma had grown, getting tall, starting to look like her mother at that age. She helped Tom in the garden, asked questions about plants and birds, and why the trees were different colors. Smart kid, curious. Tom tried to answer everything truthfully. One afternoon, while Jennifer was napping and Emma was reading on the porch, Tom walked out to the valley. The overhang was still empty, but sitting on the flat rock where they used to keep their fire was a bundle. Tom unwrapped it carefully. Inside were herbs, dried flowers, a small piece of worked leather, and a single feather, gray and brown, bigger than any bird feather Tom had ever seen. He wrapped it back up, brought it home, hung it above his bed. That night, Emma asked him, "Grandpa, do you believe in magic? What kind of magic? The kind where impossible things are real." Tom thought about it, about three shapes in a river, about knocks in the darkness, about trust between species that shouldn't exist. "Yeah," he said, "I believe in that kind." Emma smiled. "Me too." July was hot. Tom's heart struggled in the heat. He spent most days inside with a fan running. The doctor wanted him to come in. Tom kept putting it off. August brought a thunderstorm that knocked out power for 2 days. Tom sat in the dark and listened to the rain, thought about Margaret, about Red, about the family in the woods, about the life he'd lived and the time he had left. Not much time. He could feel it. Something in his chest felt wrong, felt like it was winding down. He called Jennifer, asked her to come visit in September. She said, of course. September arrived cool and clear. Perfect fall weather. The maples started turning, red and gold against the evergreens. Jennifer came on a Saturday. Alone this time, Dave was working. Emma had school. They sat on the porch with coffee and watched the woods. "I need to tell you something," Tom said. Jennifer's face went tight. "Are you sick?" "I'm 69 years old with a bad heart. I'm always sick." "Dad, listen. Just listen." He took a breath. "Last spring, something happened. Something I can't really explain. But it changed me, reminded me what matters." He told her the story, not all of it, kept the details vague. Said he'd helped some people who were in trouble, that they'd shown him kindness in return, that it had woken something up in him that he thought was dead. Didn't mention what the people were, didn't mention the knocks or the gifts or the valley. Just the important parts, the human parts. Jennifer listened. When he finished, she said, "I'm glad something helped you find your way back." "Me too, but you're scaring me a little." "What are you not telling me?" "Nothing that matters." Tom pulled the stone from his pocket, the one with the symbols. "When I'm gone, I want you to keep this. And the carved figure on the windowsill, and the acorn, they're important." "Dad, you're not dying tomorrow." "No, but I'm dying, sooner than later, and I need you to promise me something." Jennifer's eyes filled. "What?" "Promise you'll remember that I loved you, that I loved your mother, that I was proud of you and Sarah even when I couldn't say it, and promise you'll take care of these woods after I'm gone. Keep people away from the valley. Keep it wild." "I promise," she whispered. They sat together until the sun went down. Then Jennifer went inside to make dinner, and Tom stayed on the porch. 3 knocks came from the woods, soft, almost questioning. Tom knocked back 3 times. His answer, "I'm here. I'm still here. We're still connected." The knocks came again, closer this time, and through the twilight, Tom saw them. All 3, standing at the tree line, the father, the mother, the child who wasn't so small anymore. They didn't approach, just stood there, watching. Tom raised his hand, a wave, a goodbye that wasn't quite goodbye yet. The father raised his hand in return, that same gesture from last winter. Hand over heart. Then pointing to Tom, "You matter. You are remembered. You are not alone." Tom felt his eyes burn, nodded. They turned and walked back into the trees, disappearing like smoke, like memory, like everything that matters. Jennifer came to the door. "Dad, dinner's ready." "Coming," Tom said. He touched the stone in his pocket one more time, then went inside. October brought the first snow. Early this year, Tom's heart struggled more. The doctor insisted on tests. Tom went. Results weren't good. Heart failure progressing faster than expected. Maybe 6 months, maybe less. Tom accepted it. He'd had 69 years, some of them good, some of them hard. The last 2 years had been a gift he hadn't expected. Time to reconnect with his daughters. Time to remember what it meant to be part of something bigger than himself. He called both girls, told them. They cried. He didn't. Wasn't being brave. Just didn't have tears left. And he wasn't sad about it. Not really. "I've had a good run," he told them. "Don't waste time being sad. Just remember the good parts." They promised they would. November was cold. Tom spent Thanksgiving with Jennifer's family again. Sarah came too. It was good, loud and warm and full of life. Emma gave him a drawing. A man standing next to trees. The trees had faces, happy faces. "That's you, and your friends in the woods," she said. Tom's throat went tight. "It's perfect. Thank you." He hung it on the refrigerator when he got home. Right in the center, where he'd see it every day. December brought more snow. Tom's energy faded. Simple tasks exhausted him. Walking to the mailbox left him winded. Splitting wood was impossible. Mike Russo started coming by twice a week to check on him. Brought firewood, made sure Tom was eating. "Don't need babysitting," Tom said. "Too bad, you're getting it anyway." On Christmas Eve, Tom sat by the fire alone. Jennifer had invited him to Syracuse, but he'd said no, wanted to be here, in his cabin, with his memories. He pulled out the stone, looked at the symbols, the tree, the man, the circle, protection, connection, family. He thought about Margaret, hoped she knew he'd found his way back, that he'd become someone she could be proud of again. He thought about his girls, about Emma, about the life they'd have after he was gone. He thought about the family in the woods, wondered if they were warm, if they were safe, if they'd survive another winter. At midnight, he heard them, 3 knocks, loud and clear despite the wind. Tom got up slowly, put on his coat, walked to the back door. The cold was brutal, but he stepped out anyway. And there, standing in the snow at the edge of the clearing, were all 3 of them. The father stepped forward, crossed half the distance, stopped. Tom walked out to meet him, his heart hammering, his breath short. But he kept walking. They stood face to face, man and creature, connected by something that had no name in any language. The father reached out, placed his massive hand over Tom's heart. Gentle, careful. Tom placed his hand over the creature's heart, felt it beating, strong, alive. They stood like that for a long moment. Then the father nodded. That slow, deliberate nod. One last time, Tom nodded back. The creature returned to his family. They turned together and walked into the woods, into the darkness, into whatever time they had left. Tom stood in the snow until he couldn't feel his feet, then went inside, sat by the fire, touched the stone in his pocket. "Goodbye," he whispered. January came. Tom's health declined rapidly. Jennifer moved him to her house in Syracuse. He protested. She insisted. He was too weak to fight. He lasted 3 weeks. On January 28th, with Jennifer holding one hand and Sarah holding the other, Tom Mercer died quietly in his sleep. His last words were, "Tell them, I remembered." Jennifer didn't know what he meant, but she said she would. They buried him next to Margaret in the cemetery in Lake Placid. Small service. Family and a few old friends. Mike Russo gave a speech about how Tom was stubborn and difficult and loyal to a fault. Everyone laughed through tears. Emma placed a small stone on his grave, smooth and dark, with a white vein running through it. After the funeral, Jennifer and Sarah cleaned out the cabin. Most of it went to Goodwill or the dump, but Jennifer kept 3 things: the carved figure, the acorn, and the stone with the symbols. She put them in a box, kept them in her closet, took them out sometimes, and wondered what her father had really experienced in those woods, what had changed him, what he'd found. She kept her promise, bought the land around the valley when it went up for sale 2 years later, put it in a conservation easement. No development, no logging, no hunting, forever wild, kept people away, like her father had asked. And sometimes, when she visited with Emma, now a teenager, they'd walk to the clearing with the spring. The stones were still stacked there, still waiting. Emma would add a stone to the pile. Jennifer would sit on the fallen log and remember her father, the man he'd been at the end, the man he'd fought to become. One evening, as they were leaving, Emma stopped. "Mom, did you hear that?" Hear what? Like knocking. 3 times. Jennifer listened, heard nothing but wind. Probably just a woodpecker. Yeah, Emma said. But she smiled, like she knew better. They walked back to the car. Behind them, deep in the woods, 3 soft knocks echoed through the trees. A rhythm, a language, a promise kept. The forest remembers. The woods hold secrets. And some connections transcend death, transcend species, transcend everything we think we know about what's possible. Tom had learned that, had lived it, had died knowing it, and somewhere in the high peaks, a family survived another winter, carrying the memory of a man who'd pulled them from a river, who'd given them time, who'd kept his promise. They would remember too, in their own way, for as long as they lasted, and that was enough. That's Tom's story. For everyone who commented 7 at the start, appreciate you riding along. More next Friday.